Hello, welcome back to the NOTCAST, Thursday, 20th of April 2023. Today I'm going to be talking about the 9th studio record released by Welsh band the Manic Street Preachers. Although, of course, they're not they're just Manic Street Preachers. And it was released on the 18th of May 2009. That album is Journal for Plague Lovers. It's pretty bizarre, actually, to think about how old this album is. This album is 14 years old. Well, 13 years, 11 months, 2 days. And it really doesn't feel like it's that old at all. To me, I remember this album coming out very, very vividly. The passing of time and all of its crimes and everything that goes with it is a really strange thing. Because, of course, when I became a Manic Street Preachers fan, which was in 1991 on Snub TV, 14 years before that was 1977. And that was the height of punk and prog rock. And other things starting with P, and Star Wars, of course. Whereas this doesn't feel like it's an ancient artifact from history. This feels like it's one of the later albums, one of the more contemporary records. And of course, them having done 9 albums in 17 years, since 1992, it's really, really weird to think about an album every 2 years. You kind of go, well, what's the driver for that? To do an album every 2 years? Are you, in fact, if you include the solo records by James Dean Bradfield and Nicky Wire, you've got I think 11 studio albums at this point, and you kind of go, well, what's the driver for that? Is it a workaholism? Is it a desire, a compulsion to create? Is it that this is your job and that's the thing that you do now? And sometimes, there are parts of the Manic's catalogue, and we'll get to, I think, what becomes more obvious parts of the Manic's catalogue as we get a little further into the discography, where it really does feel like it's a job. It's a thing that they do. That there's not like a compelling creative reason. It's just, well, we go into a studio and we write some songs, and then we put out some songs, and we tour some songs, and we sell some songs, and we sell some gig tickets, and we sell some T-shirts. And we play, the same venues and civic halls that we played in 1994. And the fans get older with us, and that's just kind of how it works. It's a pretty strange thing, actually, to be a Manics fan, and my relationship to the band's work has changed over time. It's fair to say I have changed. I don't think the band necessarily have changed, but I've changed, and what I expect from a band has changed over time. And this album, to me, is probably the first Manics album where at the time of release, I very kind of consciously felt that I was perhaps starting to grow away from the band. And it also felt like it was the first time in their career where they'd started to do something that was like a backward step, I think it's fair to say. Now, that sounds very harsh. It's not meant to be harsh, but it did feel like it was a backward step when it came out. Because the thing about Journal for Plague Lovers is that it is an album that's made by a version of the band that hadn't existed for 14 years by the time it had come out, which sounds bizarre when you think about it, but all the lyrics on the album were written by the missing, presumed dead and declared dead Richey Edwards, who had left and went missing on the 1st of February 1995, which I talked about in, I think, the Holy Bible episode, and was effectively kind of like the band's minister for propaganda before that. So the guy that wrote the lyrics, he thought about the artwork, he thought about the sequencing, the track orders, the set lists, the visual identity of the group, and then to revisit the unfinished songs, the lyrics that he had written from a 15-year remove, and to then try and recreate those into songs. It felt to me like we were having a slice into a window of a history that didn't and shouldn't have happened. There was an element of, like, for example, when Guns N' Roses got back with Duff and Slash in 2016, I did feel quite disappointed, because I felt like all the forward progress that had been made by the band over time had just been kind of junked, and went, well, we've gone so far, but we know it's not as good. It's not as good. We're going to go back to the old guys. Like when Bruce went back to Iron Maiden, Slush and Daft went back to the Guns, for example, and it just felt like it was the first backwards and retrospective step, the first one where the band became historic as opposed to making history, if that makes sense. And I mean, as an album, it's a good album. It clearly shows that it would have been impossible to replicate the sonic atmosphere of the Holy Bible, the intensity, the purity of thought, the clarity of vision, the articulacy of language, and the focus of the music. It just couldn't happen. And going back to it again, it just felt like it was trying to do that again, but not succeeding. From a lyrical point of view, the album was built upon some leftover lyrics by Richey, and these are reproduced with some minor changes. This, by the way, is the 2 CD deluxe edition that was available from the band's website in a signed form, signed by the 3 remaining members of the group, and it had typewritten lyrics and artwork that had been built by Richey and prepared and left in his estate when he went missing. So there's typewritten lyrics to 13 songs on the album, and what you can see is that the lyrics were edited by and large, and sometimes lines were taken out, moved, put in different places, changed in terms of temper and rhythm and structure, and they were then presented as almost like a reproduction of his notebook. But obviously there were other lyrics which he'd left which weren't used, and there was a couple of lyrics which had been used previously, or parts of other lyrics which had been used previously, which were then put back into the context of where they belonged in this particular record. So for example, I think in particular, I think it might be, is it Pretension Repulsion? I think maybe I should sound more confident about that. But one of the lyrics, "Doors Slowly Closing," actually is the track, had some of its lines repurposed and reused for the song "Picturesque" on the God Save the Manic EP from a few years previously. So the band were clearly kind of looking back and forward at the same time. This was also the album that came hot on the heels of the "Send Away the Tigers" records. And "Send Away the Tigers," although obviously that isn't the cover for "Send Away the Tigers," sold a lot of copies. And so going back to the version of the band which did "Send Away the Tigers," it was their first, well, it was like a major reclamation of the band's chart status after a few years pretty much in the wilderness. So obviously the number ones that they had around about the time of "This Is My Truth, Tell Me Yours" had started to turn into number 60s. Number 6s had then started to turn into number like 26s for things like "The Love of Richard Nixon." So "Send Away the Tigers" with "Your Love Alone Is Not Enough," that single that I think went to number 1 or number 2, did very, very well in the charts. It felt like the band had got back and wrestled the crown of successful mass communication and successful kind of chart success, and then went, "No, we're not going to do that. We're going to go and make an album, and it's not going to have any B-sides, and we're not going to release any singles." And part of that could be, from a creative perspective, maybe Nicky wasn't quite writing as many lyrics as he used to write, and so therefore, rather than having, let's say, 50 lyrics for an album, he might have got to the end of 2007 and thought, "Oh, actually, I haven't got any other lyrics, or I've got like 4, and that isn't quite enough to make an album on." So the idea being is that they can reclaim the commercial cachet of the Holy Bible, which had become a cult record, and although at the time it came out it was not that successful, and the critical applause which came with that, but then also to say, yeah, we're not just a chart band, we're like, meaningful artists, man. But by going back and taking Richey's unused lyrics and turning those into songs, it felt a little disingenuous, because it's kind of like getting into the jeans that you had 15 years ago, going, "Still fair." It's like, but the rest of you've changed. Your hair's changed, your beard's changed, you wear different glasses. Doesn't matter. Still fit into the jeans. And you kind of go, it's not the same thing. So it's a sound of like trying to recreate light, or for lightning to strike twice, which it doesn't do, and to recreate something that has been gone. Although Richey barely played on the records, that's not really the point. The point is that they're trying to use something which doesn't exist anymore, to recapture something which can't be recaptured. It's impossible for that to happen. So Journal for Plague Lovers, the attempt, I think, to reclaim the band's critical success is, as you can see from the cover, an artwork by Jenny Saville, the same artist that did the cover artwork for the Holy Bible. This one is called, and I do need to check the sleeve credits on here. I think this is called Stare by Jenny Stammel, whereas the other one was, I think, facing left, right, centre. Was the previous one. And again, this is not a cheerful picture. If you're going to go for an album cover and you go, this one's going to sell, what you don't want is a stare of a kid with a blooded nose. It just looks weird, and it tells you pretty much exactly what's in there. As the quote at the beginning of, I think it's Mausoleum, is, I wanted to rub the human face in its own vomit. A quote by J.G. Ballard when he was writing Crash. It does the same kind of thing. It is rubbing the human face in the the ugliness of humanity. It's a sparse, unblinking, uncharitable look at the humanity's failures and foibles. From an album kind of perspective, it's almost the sound of an unravelling, a dissection, a reckoning, an autopsy of humanity, but also actually bizarrely an autopsy and a funeral for a version of the band that didn't exist anymore. And although the lyrics had been finished, refined, re-edited by the existing members of the band, and presented in a way that was simple, sparse, minimal, and almost clever in the directness and bluntness of approach, what it felt to me was that it was an attempt to impose a structure in a life where perhaps there isn't a structure, to put an order into a chaos, and to, as the quote goes, is to try and make sense of history by looking at it after you've lived it. Life can only be lived forwards and can only be understood backwards. And there's the lyric, and I can't remember which song it is now, and I really should know, but the one where he sings, cleaning, cooking, flowering, arranging are all a form of whatever the word is. And let me just quickly check, and I think it should be, so the bridge actually on Virginia State Epileptic Colony is clean, cooking, flower arranging dissolves a kind of liberation. There's a sense of, in all the lyrics around this, that there's a discipline, and that discipline imposes a narrative and a structure and a sense upon a reality that otherwise does not necessarily make sense. You think about the course of your life, aside from the things that you have to do, you have to get up, you have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to wash your clothes, put deodorant on. All is vanity, as one of the lyrics would go on the album, for example. But what it does do is it imposes a structure where actually there probably isn't really, beyond the structure of the seasons, the winter, spring, summer, autumn, not fall. Fall is for the Americans. And this is a kind of a way of looking at, or trying to impose or make sense of a life that, or a world that by its very nature doesn't necessarily make a huge amount of sense. Being alive as a concept, it's somewhat random. On a day-to-day basis, we do stuff and we don't necessarily think about, well, why do you go to work? Well, because you need money. And why do you need money? Because of the nature of society. And if you had a universal basic income, would we go to work? Probably not. Instead, we'd make pottery and write poems and knit socks and do the things that make us happy, as opposed to the things that we have to do. Now, if you're really lucky, and work can come and set you free, if you're really lucky, you can find a job that you enjoy, that you feel comfortable in doing, and one that plays to your strengths and who you are as a human being. And many human beings don't ever get the chance to do a job like that. The idea that school is the best days of your life, and when you work for a living, you're forced to do something you don't want to do in order to get money, which you don't necessarily want to do. But you have to kind of think, lots of times we are forced to do things we don't want to do because we have to do them by the society that we exist within, that we don't have a choice about it. You can't exist outside of the whale in that respect. And so for my perspective, at least, when people say school are the best days, well, school was one of the worst days of my life. I didn't have any control over my life. I was forced to go somewhere I didn't want to go, to stand around with people I didn't like, to do things that I found boring and tedious, and to wear an outfit and a uniform like I was just another brick in the wall. And the idea of that being the best days of my life means that actually you've probably failed at being an adult. So since I've been an adult and I've had a choice around where to go and what to do, my life has got a heck of a lot better. Whereas when I was at school, it was kind of like, that's your job now. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. You've got that for the next 5 years, like a prison sentence. And to me, being at school was very much like being in prison. Whereas working for a living, yes, it's a double-edged sword, but you have more control over where you work and what you do. I mean, obviously you're limited by geography and your skills and the availability of certain opportunities. But beyond that, if you're lucky, you have the ability to mould the job into something that plays to your personality and who you are, and to be valued for it. And there's a sense of satisfaction that comes when you deliver certain bits. You can make a change, you can see certain things changing, and that's an important part of it. So Journal for Plague Lovers as an album feels like an attempt to impose a structure upon a reality that fiercely resists a structure, and to impose a kind of like a sense and a narrative retrospectively onto something that generally fiercely resists it. It opens with the first track. Of course it does, because where else would it open with but the first track, which is Peeled Apples, the first song to be heard from the album. And since there were no singles and there were no B-sides, it was tracks were serviced to radio stations or released as free downloads, and you had Peeled Apples is the opening track on the album. And Peeled Apples is it's a strange place to start an album. It really is. It opens with the lyric, "The more I see, the less I scream," and then the figure 8, "Inside out is infinity." These lyrics are disconnected. They aren't standard, they aren't linear. It's a sense of images that together creates some kind of abstract whole, basically the lyrical equivalent of something like Koyaanisqatsi or a David Lynch movie. The idea is that it's the lyric writing is disconnected from a standard structure, in so much as you don't have your standard verse, chorus, verse, bridge kind of approach. The lyrics are then forced into these like little structures which perhaps they don't necessarily fully lend themselves to. They're more like abstract word collages, which create an idea. It's very different from the Holy Bible, which is obviously the album's nearest living relative. There's the use of the discordant guitar tones, the not conventional structures, the lack of things like conventional big swooping choruses that you might expect from something like Design for Life and If You Tolerate This. It's a further step down a path that the Manics haven't really revisited since the Holy Bible. They've done it for a couple of B-sides, things like First Republic, for example. But it's more a glimpse into, well, what could have been? What direction would the band have gone in had Richey not gone missing? Would the Manics have become a niche band? Well, something like someone that's fated like Magazine or Pill or Susie and the Banshees, as opposed to a band that had once headlined stadiums, and would they have been critical darlings but not necessarily popular, and they would have lived in terraced houses as opposed to perhaps slightly bigger places than terraced houses. Maybe if the Manics had been a band that had never had hits but had just been a steady, readily working band that just did the best that they could with the material that they had, released that was what we lived with, that's what we experienced, and they sidestepped the entire element of being this huge band that had got number 2 singles and headlined arenas and can still headline arenas to this day. What happened if they'd just never been bigger than a Civic Hall and never been bigger than 3rd on the bill at the Phoenix Festival? Journal for Plague Lovers is that band. It's the version of the Manics that never existed, and they're kind of reclaiming, going, we're that band too, as well as the band that's big and popular and successful. So Peeled Apples is the first track from the album, and it kind of has this really unusual approach to reality. There's a line about riderless horses, Chomsky's Camelot, bruises on my hands from digging my nails out, a series of images against you and me, trespass your torments if you are what you want to be. Now there's a line in Roses in the Hospital about they try and pull my fingernails out from Roses in the Hospital. I want to cling to something soft. It's a callback to that lyric in Roses in the Hospital, because bruises on my hands from dragging my nails out. The idea of, and I mean, I think there's an understanding now around the divergence of thought. Is there's a thing called stimming, which some of you may know about, it's kind of like stimulation. It's like, for me, it's picking my nails. You know, it's like getting the dirt out from under my fingernails is a thing that I try to do very frequently, because when I see people with dirt under their fingernails, it just reminds me of firstly people that don't care about their appearance, but also it just feels wrong and unhygienic. And from a physical perspective, that's probably linked to traits in things like autism and Asperger's and things like that, which, depending upon who you talk to, I definitely have, or I'm just a weirdo. But from a sensory perspective, is if you understand the body that you live in and you feel the body that you live in, and I think I have some quite unusual experiences in this body. You know, one of the things that I find most infuriating is dirt under the fingernails. So you think about that lyric about digging my nails out, it's part of that. Is about part of, you know, self-perception and self-image and self-belief. But also, you know, depending on who you are, you know, some days I can feel the hair growing in my ears, or the, you know, the hair in my nose. It's really, really weird, and I don't like it. And it's almost like the sense that I'm a ghost driving a meat skeleton, and that I'm kind of trapped inside my own body, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I have to live with this kind of disconnect. Or if you think about Men in Black with the little alien that's driving the remote controlled human being, or in fact the film Dave with Eddie Murphy. I didn't think I'd go there, but there we are. The film Dave with Eddie Murphy, where I think he plays a robot called Dave and he's piloted by aliens as he reports back on how strange and unusual human beings are. These are things which I feel sometimes are, there's a version of me that lives inside me that pilots a different body. And this is just, you know, the physical manifestation of me, which I've never particularly liked, my physical appearance. I've never found a hairstyle that I've liked, so the fact that I've got no hair now probably works very well for me, actually. But I've never found a hairstyle. I never thought that, you know, the physical outer shell, this ugly bag of mostly water, as they said in their Star Trek, The Next Generation, Season 1, Episode 18, which isn't called Ugly Bags of Mostly Water. Those are the type of things where I feel that, well, you know, it's just a shell, isn't it? It's just a vehicle, and I drive the vehicle through reality. And there's these are some of the concepts that you know, run through Journal for Plague Lovers like a stick of rock. The idea of being, well, you know, not at ease with your own body, not comfortable with, or not comfortable with a society in which you're forced to exist with, or you're forced to live within, and asking questions around that and trying to impose a structure and an order and a way of making sense from the otherwise random chaos that is everyday existence. And there's a discipline in the lyrics around these that feels very much like someone's trying to put bars and grids and controls on top of something that fundamentally will not obey and will not fit into the box. Like, I have been, you know, my life has been shaved and poured into a suit, which is one of James Dean Bradfield's favourite quotes of all time. Second track on the album is Jackie Collins' Existential Question Time, which probably wins best song title in my record collection, better than anything from Flaming Lips. And the idea is obviously that Jackie Collins, the writer of such well-known 70s and 80s porno sex novels such as The Bitch and The Stud and no doubt The Horse Wrangler and some other awful things, has an existential question time where, instead of questions that are asked on day game show hosts like, what's your favourite colour of socks? Should we change ringtones? Is it okay to sing along to songs in the car? Questions like, if a married man fucks a Catholic and his wife dies without knowing, does that make him unfaithful? You know, and those other questions like, you know, if a married man, yeah, I mean, really, and then followed up with the line, the chorus is, oh mummy, what's a Sex Pistol? The idea of that lyric is just, I mean, I might be extrapolating wildly out from that lyric here, but you kind of go, wow, that's a version of reality that I never thought anybody would get to. It's the kind of conversation that I have occasionally, where you kind of take a tiny bit of an idea and you kind of like go to the umpteenth level of ridiculousness about it, and then you have Jackie Collins and Joan Collins hosting a talk show host where they talk existential questions about the nature of mankind. And it was a promo-only single, Jackie Collins' Existential Question Time. That name really rolled off the tongue. Because there was a deliberate refusal to release singles. And that might be why the album doesn't have any hits next to it. But you can also hear in Jackie Collins' Existential Question Time and a number of the other songs, including She Bathed Herself in Bleach, Marlon J.D., you can hear a kind of influence of early 80s post-punk bands, the kind of bands that the Manics had covered in the past, bands like McCarthy, bands like Wire, Public Image, things like that, and to a later extent, Camper Van Beethoven, who I don't know particularly well, Primal Scream, all that type of stuff, and you kind of go, yeah, you can really hear not just the glam stadium metal, political pop, rock cross between the Clash and Guns N' Roses of Generation Terrorist, but also the indie influence that's in there, and it's a fascinating mishmash of styles and identities. Track 3 is Me and Stephen Hawking. By the way, these song titles don't get any easier. They're all difficult and weird. I think what's the most obviously friendly song title that there is? No, there isn't one. Marlon J.D. is probably the most obvious one, and that is a song that potentially posits a secret gay relationship between Marlon Brando and James Dean. So it's pretty easy going, really. Nice friendly chart material there. Play Design for Life. That'll have them dancing in the aisles. Track 3, Me and Stephen Hawking and Jackie Collins' Existential Question Time. They have a connection between themselves. So, for example, Jackie Collins' Existential Question Time asks, "Oh, mummy, what's a Sex Pistol?" Me and Stephen Hawking kind of talks about the idea of a fixed identity versus being able to define who you are, being able to change your identity, your beliefs, your concepts, your ideas, and who you are, and define who you are by who you want to be as opposed to who you're forced to be, which ties in with a couple of things that I said earlier on. The lyrics are all around, and so it mentions Herman the bull and Tracy the sheep, and transgenic milk containing human protein. That the lyrics are around DNA splicing. And if you go to the Science Museum in London, you can see, I think, one of the first cloned sheep that ever happened, where they cloned the DNA and put it into the embryo of another sheep, and they created a clone. Me and Stephen Hawking, who, by the way, wrote the book A Brief History of Time and was staggeringly clever, and at the idea of, well, what happens if you DNA splice between bull and sheeps to create better milk? Is that pro or anti? Is that unnatural? Is that an extrapolation of it? Is that something that you should be doing? That old Jurassic Park question around the difference between what you could do and what you should do is kind of very clearly outlined in the song, if you know where to look at it. And then there's that line about, we missed the sex revolution when we failed the physical. The idea being is that, in order to participate in a war or an army or something, you have to pass a physical test around, dexterity and ability and stamina and so on and so forth. And of course, I would fail the Air Force because I'm a four-eyed gonk wearing glasses. So, it's that kind of thing, is like you miss the sex revolution when you fail the physical. The idea being is that maybe as the kind of graduation from child to man is apparently when you first have sex. And that cliche about, well, I came to her a boy and I left her a man, the idea being is, well, that's a sex revolution, and if you failed the physical, then you will always be not fully evolved, or you wouldn't have gone on to the next stage, or whatever reality is. There's some pretty dark ideas at work in this album, indeed. There really are. So this Joke Sport 7, track 4, is, I think, possibly I might be reading too much into it, but it feels like it's autobiographical, or Richey describing his own state of mind, similar to Vegetable Man by Pink Floyd. It's a self-description from quite a harsh, unforgiving eye. The idea of that lyric around, loose and guilty and whipped, sterility persecutes, and I have plenty bruised and nailed and quit, merciful and mourned and meek. The point of thinking, I could have been, I was, but I'm not. It's pretty much oh God, I hate to use this phrase, I really do. But it reminds me of the idea of self-loathing from somebody that doesn't feel themselves to be a full participant in society, that feels, especially when people talk about Chads and Stacys and all that rubbish, absolute dingbats, you guys, losers actually. And it's then you're judging yourself by other people's standards and other people's ideals about what it should be and what you should be and who you should be, etc., etc. And in fact, if there's anything that comes through this album, it's the idea that you have the ability to, and you should define who you are by what you choose to be and not what you're forced to be, or the ideas that are outside of your control. We have Journal for Plague Lovers, track 5. Which, by the way, there is an acoustic version of Journal for Plague Lovers, which is absolutely brilliant. I think it was only released as a download through a specific download service provider. The late noughties was a weird time for formatting, by the way. It really was. And we've got Journal for Plague Lovers has this chorus about only a God can bruise and only a God reserves the right to forgive those that revile him. These are not fun lyrics. These are dealing with complex, difficult, abstract ideas around nature and identity and religion and belief and the fixed nature of identity. It picks up from some of the imagery that you've seen all the way through the Manic's career around the Bible and religion and belief, and around having an ethical and moral framework, and around the control that you have around that, and how much of it is original sin and how much of it is predefined by God and everything that goes with it. It's a difficult abstract lyric to really try and untangle what the meanings are of that. We have I think the last track, side 1, She Bathed Herself in a Bath of Bleach. That's a nice cheery song title for you, isn't it? The studio demo is, I prefer the studio demo of the track, which is on the second CD of the deluxe edition. Here it has a different vocal and a different chorus on there. Still very good, just different, more mellow. I'll talk about the demos when we get to the deluxe edition shortly. Facing page, top left, track 7, or In Ye Olde Days, side B. So this is side A. Obviously it's a part of a close-up of the very top of the kid's head, by the way, on the label. Actually, I've never done this, so I guess if you put that kind of about there, it would probably look something like that, maybe. I don't know. Or maybe it's actually, no, it's the size of the hair, isn't it? Yeah, so it's there, isn't it? That's the size of his head, which you can see there. And then, well, anyway, that's side A, side B, and again, it's just the front of his hair there, which is weird for a label. I don't even know why I'm doing this. You can clearly tell I do these in one go and I don't rehearse what I'm going to say sometimes. Facing page, top left, side B, track 1, Journal for Plague Lovers. Oh, I better move that. That'll make you go blind. It feels like it's a sequel to Small Black Flowers That Grow in the Sky, which is the track 6 on Everything Must Go. But again, it's clearly it's a lyric which is about Richey and about himself and his self-opinions. Here I am, rise and shine, weighed down, of course I smile. This beauty here dripping neophobia. Here I am, rise and shine, weighed down, of course I cry. Here is oblivion, bathed acid, red, mute, oily, discolour, skin cancer calories. It's, the idea of, and it also calls back to some of the concepts around self-care and self-preservation, which appear in some of the other lyrics. Things like, I try to walk in the straight line, an imitation of dignity, from despair to where, cleaning, cooking, flower arranging dissolves a sense of liberation, from Virginia State Epileptic Colony, for example. These are lyrics around self-discipline, self-control, around being focused on, very, very clearly, the act of maintenance as a human being. Dye my hair but the colour runs out, which I think is a line from one of the Holy Bible songs. I never can't seem to stay a fixed ideal. That's from Die in the Summertime. These almost obsessions around image and self-belief and self-perception and self-control, trying to impose a sense and an order upon what, if you let nature do its work untended, of course, you never shave, you don't wash, you end up honking, and you smell a bit, and your teeth fall out because you never brush them, and all those type of things. If you dye your hair, the colour comes out because the hair always keeps growing. It's these type of things. It's about trying to impose order and control over something that by its nature becomes untended and untangled from reality. We have track 8. The next track is Marlon JD. I think Marlon JD is a great track, actually. It's probably the closest thing to a single on the album, and of course it didn't get anywhere near a single release, did it? Of course, because nothing got a single release. It is inspired by a book by Carlson McCullens, which is Reflections in a Golden Eye, and actually the film starring Marlon Brando, which is quoted many times during the song. It's built on a drum machine, and like many of the Manic's most underrated songs, specifically I'm thinking Automatic Technicolor, there's a drum machine and live drums effectively playing at the same time. But the concept behind Marlon JD is takes I think a bit of a cue from a rumour that Marlon Brando and James Dean may or may not have been intimate at one point. Is to kind of overstate it, I think. But then the lyric is very much, it gives a sense of control, rigidness, order, discipline, focus, and then there's even the way in which the lyrics are designed. Learn to live without clutter, to live without luxury. Sometimes I envy them. I will not beg because this is how I am, and give him some dignity. These lyrics around very clearly going, cleaning, cooking, flower arranging dissolves in a sense of liberation. This is, the attempt to impose order upon an otherwise disordered reality. Simplify. Take things down to their basest elements, to just the skeleton of what it is that's going on, and then build from there. Don't be complicated, ornate, overblown, that type of stuff. Doors Closing Slowly, I think it's track 9, is the one which the title was first mentioned, I think in about 1996 or thereabouts. I was like, oh, that sounds amazing. What is that? Well, that's mostly the lyrics to Picturesque, which is a B-side from God Save the Manics, as I've mentioned previously. The lyric is again quite religious. There's imagery around crosses and crucifixion and morality and belief and condemnation, and the idea of the 7 levels of hell from Dante and 7 deadly sins. And if you look in the CD booklet, no, I better go and find the page now. There's a photograph of the illustration of Dante's 7 levels of hell, which was of course used as a t-shirt design by Nirvana, the fudge packing, crack smoking, corporate crack whores. Also the baby is there, but also this kind of like image of, I think, the 7 levels of hell was one of Richey's tattoos that he got in 1994. This was something which was very cleverly weighing on his mind around the circles of hell and the idea of post-life punishment and everything that goes with being judged by other people, even though you can't help what your nature actually is. It's around trying to change who you are or define who you are by what you believe and what you do, as opposed to what you can't control and what you can't look after. Track 10 is All Is Vanity. Again, another cheery title. Now, my brother, being the absolute nincompoop that he was in around about 1996, would tisk at me and say all is vanity when he saw me shaving when I was about 23. And I'm like, I just don't like having a beard, but I reserve the right to change my mind. I've had a beard for 6 years. I think I'm going to keep this one for a bit longer yet. And but it wasn't vain to shave. It's just I don't like having a beard. It's like, don't be ridiculous and stupid. But frankly, and I know you're going to watch this, Graham, you've always been judgmental, and it hasn't always been the best path to take through life. So obviously, you don't have to argue with everybody on Twitter, just some of them. So All Is Vanity has the lyric, haven't shaved for days, gives the appearance of delay, the luxury of one more dye, the idea of being, controlling who you are, what you look like. And there's this lyric around, I would prefer no choice, one bread, one milk, one food, that's all I'm confused. I only want one truth. I really don't mind being lied to. It's not what's wrong, it's what's right. It makes me feel like I'm talking a foreign language sometimes. It's the facts of life, sunshine. So, the idea of it. And by the way, if you've watched The Fly, the David Cronenberg film, there's this very telling scene where Jeff Goldblum's character, Brundle, opens the door to the cupboards, and he's got just a row of identical suits, identical shirts, identical trousers, because he doesn't have to think about, well, what am I going to wear? I just have to wear something because society dictates I have to wear something, so I'm going to wear that. Society dictates I have to do certain things, so I have to do that. And then it's kind of like taking out the choices so that you can focus your brain functions on the higher stuff which you're thinking about, as opposed to, am I going to wear black jeans, or am I going to wear blue trousers today? Am I going to wear cords? And, in interest of full transparency, I have 40 pairs of identical black socks. I never need to match them up because they all match each other. That means I don't have to spend time matching up the socks. All of my pants are black because that way I don't have to worry. Black pants, black socks always works. And again, that's part of simplifying the functions in life so that life is as easy as it possibly can be, because life is pretty hard anyway, so why make it more complicated than it has to be? One bread, one food, one milk, that's all. I don't need choice. And then we have Pretension Repulsion, which is probably the most obvious of the songs, which would, if you were going to take a song out and make it a B-side, it would be that one. It follows Nirvana in Pretension Repulsion. You can really see when you look at the lyric and the concept of it and the way in which the song is structured, the Nirvana influence is very, very clear. The theme that runs through, I think, all of this album is around the idea of self-identity, self-definition, the concept of perpetual decay, the concept of all is vanity, having to shave, dye your hair, wash your clothes, clean, cook, flower arranging. A really pivotal lyric there in Virginia State Epileptic Colony. The gap between life and that of others, and being judged by others, and how to try and reconcile that with who you are and what you find comfortable, especially if there's a gap between the two, and there's almost like a confrontation of other people, because people make judgment calls about you all the time. People will look at you and they'll think things, they'll say things, they'll act in certain ways, they'll make an assessment about, are you a threat, what kind of person are you, from the moment that you interact with them to the moment that you stop, and what kind of vibe do you give off? Are you somebody that would fight back? Could I mug you? These are the kind of questions which sometimes go through people's heads. Or if you were young and single and you'd meet somebody of the opposite sex or the gender that you're attracted to, and you kind of go, would I? Would they? Should I? Should they? Who knows? These are the kind of questions which we grapple with. The big questions, not what we're going to have for dinner. But over time, and as I said before, if life is a block of granite, you chip away all the bits that don't look like you until you've got what feels like who you are. And that is a theme that comes all the way through the album about identity and self-identification and self-creation around who you are. So we've got Pretension Repulsion. We've got the song which I've quoted pretty much every few minutes so far. The penultimate track on the album is Virginia State Epileptic Colony. And that lyric, cleaning, cooking, flower arranging dissolves in a kind of liberation. Today the doctors allow the illusion of choice and draw a perfect circle. I mean, these are dark lyrics around society and the nature of it, and it seems like it's very much inspired by, or at least draws experience from, Richey's experience in the mental health treatments in the 90s, which it's fair to say were not quite as advanced when dealing with trauma and PTSD and psychology as it was before. It seems to be, certainly at that point in history, that the way to treat somebody that had a mental health crisis was to give them so many drugs they couldn't feel anything, and then wonder why they walked around like they were in a fog all day long. There's a degree of functionality around that, which ties in with the old phrase about just enough education to perform. The idea of giving people just enough information so they can do what they need to do to function as a member of society without them actually thinking about or questioning, what is life? Why am I here? What is all this about? Who knows? I don't know. last track is William's last words, and the lyric to William's last words is much longer. So on the lyric booklet that is in the CD, hang on a moment, I will just bring that out here. William's last words is effectively a page and a half of typewritten single paragraph text, a wodge of text, all typed in capitals. It's a eulogy. And for the record, it's edited and rearranged, restructured. Huge chunks of it are taken out for the recorded version. But William's last words is almost a farewell or a goodbye letter that the band created from the point of view of going, this is us speaking to you, using your words, relaying them back to you. It's a farewell and it's a funeral, and the nature of a funeral is a funeral exists for the grieving. It doesn't exist for the left. It exists for the left. It doesn't exist for those that have lived. Let me rephrase that. It is a funeral is for the left and not for the leaving. It is for those that have lived and not for those that have died. It is for the humans to process the loss. And grief, of course, is the sound of love leaving the body, and the sound of us kind of mourning the object of affection and love that we are no longer able to put our feelings towards and our experiences with. Funerals are for the living, they're not for the dead. And William's last words is probably, in terms of, and the whole album I think is probably an attempt artistically and creatively to mould a way of saying goodbye to a friend that they never had an opportunity to properly mourn, because there wasn't a body, there was just an absence, and the absence became a presence in itself. And it's kind of like a very difficult thing to process, but effectively I think this might have been the album that they needed to make in order to move to the next stage beyond that, because otherwise there was still that unresolved business that was still holding them back a little bit. You know, and if you've ever been in a relationship that's come to an end and you haven't had the ability to really say goodbye to that, or you haven't had that closure around it, it's really painful to live with. You know, I mean, there's been a couple of relationships where one relationship I never got any closure with, and I'm still kind of feeling the after effects of that. I'm still feeling that, because I never got the opportunity to really kind of put all of those feelings into a box and then put the box at the back, at the bottom of the ground. And then there was another one where there was a degree of unfinished business, which it took a long time, but I was able to get the ending that deserved. And I was able to process that and to realise I'd come through the other side of a profound experience. But if you don't have that moment, almost that ceremony of farewell and goodbye, it's really, really difficult to close that off satisfactorily in your own mind. And I think that's the problem that Journal for Plague Lovers has, actually, is it's an album that is a way of closing a particular book on a particular part of a particular life. And it's probably the nearest thing a record that music has to the equivalent of a funeral, really, I think, in some respects. It's a really good album, but it does feel like the Manics taking a step backwards for the first time in their career, and looking back at what's happened before and making a decision about consciously trying to recreate something that might have been lost in order to be able to close it and say farewell to it. There are 4 extra songs which didn't fit on the album, by the way. One is called Bag Lady, which is a hidden track on some editions of the album. Another one is called Alien Orders and Invisible Armies, which is an instrumental track, which is only on the Japanese edition of the album, not particularly great. And then the last song, which was recorded in 2009 but really belongs with the album afterwards and was released as a free download from the band's site, was The Girl from Tiger Bay, a song written for Shirley Bassey, possibly the Wales's finest female singer of all time. Yes, woman from Catatonia, better than you. So I'm going to wrap up with just a quick tour through a 2 CD edition version of the album. It contains your standard album on CD 1 and the original demos on CD 2. This is the first time that the band released a contemporary special edition version of an album with demos or extra tracks. Everything else up to this point had just been your standard album. This was also one of the first times the band was signing stuff that was sold through their web stores. The the CD version here contains typewritten lyrics and photographs of artwork that was created by Richey in his spare time or whilst touring, almost kind of like follow on. This is very definitely, by the way, Richey specialised in doing these type of designs. So Manic set lists from around about this period had these drawings on and then had his handwritten set lists. A photograph of the handwritten Cardiff set list from Cardiff 1994 is on the closing pages of this particular book. So it's a fascinating and quite essential thing, because you can understand how the song becomes the song. You can hear the genesis of it. I mean, I love listening to demos. I love listening to alternate versions of songs. I love getting glimpses into what could have been, and sometimes what isn't. So here is the photograph of the Cardiff set list, by the way, which I think had the only live performance of Mausoleum until 2014 as well on there. And in the booklet here, there is this page which kind of identifies the basic needs of all individuals: 1, to love and to be loved, and 2, to feel that we are worthwhile to ourselves and others, alongside a checklist of what is regarded to be elements in healthy relationships: trust, empathy, respect, honesty, communication, personal integrity, consideration, acceptance, understanding, compassion, and compatibility. As somebody who, every relationship I've been in apart from one has failed, that sounds very cynical. It's not really. It's a joke, although it's a very, very dry joke, like a strong vodka. It's a really interesting insight. It's a very, very good record, but I have to try and divorce it from the Manic's chronology and think about it in terms of what it is, as opposed to what it felt like at the time. So this was the first time where I didn't see multiple shows on a Manic's tour. The only time I saw them on this tour at the Camden Roundhouse was the 34th Manic's gig I'd been to. I've been to 43 in the course of my life. I think that's as far as I'm going to go. I don't think I'm going to see them again. But 34 in 17 years is a really healthy score for seeing a band. I'd normally go and see them 4 or 5 times per album tour, and as they were on, I think, their 9th album at this point, I was on about 4 shows per album. But I saw one show and I was like, I don't need to see any more now. I really don't. And there comes a point when you've seen a band and you kind of go, well, how many times should I see them? They're going to play the same 14 songs, roughly in the same order every night. The old songs, they're going to play the same 5 or 6 new ones. This one, by the way, Camden, was probably the second longest Manic's gig I've ever seen. It was 29 songs. Still only over in about 2 hours. But it was one of the longest ones. And at the end of that show, I just felt that maybe I wasn't going to see them that many more times in future. But that's for a future episode, actually. The last time I think I saw them was at Kingston Prism in 2021, about 18 months ago. And I just got the sense that was it. That was the end of the line for me. And there wasn't going to be any more. Which is a shame, but so be it. Nothing good lasts forever, not even nothing itself. I'm going to wrap up here. Take care of yourselves and each other. Stay beautiful. If you've liked it, subscribe. If you don't like it, subscribe anyway and just don't watch them. I think it's probably the best way to describe it. Just remember the quote from George Bernard Shaw that's on the album: "A life spent making mistakes is not only more honourable but more useful than a life spent doing nothing." So if this podcast and all of these NOTCASTs are in fact great big mistakes, then it is more honourable than not doing anything at all. So stay beautiful, and I will see you all soon. Bye.